Hi everyone, welcome to the channel Sluggers Blue for your CAT VRC preparation. In today's session, we'll be taking up an RC that was asked in your CAT exam in the year 2019, the second slot. And I've titled the RC as Capital Cities Disgorging Bureaucrats. 517 words, 5 questions. Again, standard uh, passage length for CAT. In this video, I'll be taking you through the passage in detail. In the second part of the video, this is the first part where I explain the passage to you. The second part, I'll be taking you through the questions. Okay, so yeah, so let's start.
Okay, now for those of you who might be watching these sessions for the first time, I'll very briefly take you through the structure of these sessions. Every single session caters to one RC, single RC, and is divided into two parts, part one and part two. What you're currently watching is the first part, okay? And in the first part, I take you through the passage and explain the passage paragraph by paragraph by the help of a schematic diagram. The second part is where we discuss the questions in detail of the RC. Okay. Now you can also attempt the RC by clicking on a link which is available in the description of this video. Okay. Now 40 session guys make up a course which is titled as an anthology of RCs. Okay, for your reading comprehension preparation for the CAT. I hope that's clear. Let's start.
Okay, guys. So now the way we'll go about understanding the passages. Well, your screen is, as you can see, is divided into two parts. On the left side, you have the passage, and on the right side, you have this space where schematic diagrams will appear as I read the passage for you. We'll go paragraph by paragraph. I'll read the paragraph. There'll be some schematic diagrams will appear alongside as I read the paragraph, and then I'll explain the paragraph using the schematic diagrams, and then we'll do the same for every subsequent paragraph. Okay, so that's how we'll go about it. Okay, guys. So starting with the first paragraph, author says, around the world, capital cities are disgorging bureaucrats. In the post-colonial fervor of the 20th century, coastal capitals picked by trade-focused empires were spurned for regionally neutral new ones. Okay, so let's understand what he's trying to convey here in the first couple of sentences. First, he simply states that around the world there's a trend going on where capital cities are disgorging bureaucrats. That means capital cities are simply sending out their employees, the government officials. Bureaucrats is a term that is used for government officials. And disgorging, the word disgorging stands for forcing someone out or sending them out. In this case, in this context, sending out will be the more appropriate meaning of this word instead of forcing out. So he simply states the trend that around the world there is a noteworthy trend going on that capital cities, the cities where the capitals of the countries are situated, these capital cities, they are sending out their employees, right? The employees of the government will be your bureaucrats, the government employees. They're sending out the government employees out of the capital cities, right? And he simply notes this trend, and then he says that in the post-colonial fervor of the 20th century, coastal capitals picked by trade-focused empires. Now, these trade-focused empires would simply be the colonialists who had been ruling over these nations, right? Like the way the Britishers ruled over India, the Britishers were the colonialists, and we were the colony there. So the colonialists who had been ruling over these nations, they had set up their capitals of their empire on the coasts, right? They had set up the capital of their empire on the coast. Why had they done so? Because they were mainly focused on the trade, right? So because they were mainly focused on the trade, they had set up their empire, the capitals on the coast. And what happened in the post-colonial fervor of the 20th century? Now, post-colonial fervor of the 20th century is basically the phase of the part of the 20th century where after these nations, when the colonies, after they got their independence, in their enthusiasm of changing things, okay, after they got their independence, that's what that's what the author refers to when he says the post-colonial fervor. That means after the phase where these nations that were being ruled over, they were kind of like really, they had this zest and eagerness and keenness to change things after they got independence, right? So in this process of changing things after their independence in the post-colonial part of the 20th century, these nations, what they did was they got rid of these coastal capitals. They said, okay, now we are not going to have our capitals situated on the coast. We're going to have them situated in a more regionally neutral area. So basically, not based on trade, etc. They basically have the capitals based out of and some other region, which is basically not dependent on a particular basis, regionally neutral zones. Okay, so that's what he means. He simply means that okay, there is a trend that is going on where capital cities are forcing out the bureaucrats out of the capital, and then he notes that what had happened earlier in the post-colonial fervor of the 20th century, what had also happened was that coastal capitals, which were picked at that point of time in the past by trade-focused colonialists and trade-focused empires, they had been changed for more regionally neutral capitals. Okay, and then he says, but decamping wholesale is costly and unpopular. But he says that this wholesale, this complete decamping or changing of capitals from one place to another place is something that is very costly and very unpopular. Okay, and and thus governments these days prefer piecemeal dispersal. Okay, and thus what governments do these days is, this is something that the governments had done in the post-colonial fervor of the 20th century. Okay, now what they do is they actually go for piecemeal dispersal. That means they disperse just some parts of their capital to different parts of the country, different parts of the nation. Now they don't displace the whole capital, they just displace some parts of it. Well, in this case, like he's basically referring to the sending out of the government officials, right? Exactly what he had said in the first sentence, right? So now what they do is, because this whole complete displacement is costly and unpopular, now they simply displace some parts of it. So they basically send out the government officials. Okay, kind of work from home scenario, not necessarily. Okay, please take that on side note. Okay, then next he says that this trend of piecemeal dispersal uh, reflects how the world has changed. Okay, in the past eras, when information traveled at a snail's pace, when information used to travel really slowly, civil servants, again your bureaucrats, the government officials, they had to cluster together because the information would travel like really slowly. Then obviously they have to work together, so they need to communicate with each other, and like you cannot be far off. You need to be together so that you can get some work done, right? Because well, there was no means of quick communication over large distances. So yes, so because in the past eras information traveled at a snail's pace, and hence civil servants had to cluster together, right? But now desk workers can ping emails and video chat around the world. But now because of the technological development in the areas of communication, now desk workers, they don't need to cluster together. They can work from varied distances, and they can ping emails and video chat around the world. Travel for face-to-face meetings may be unavoidable, but yes, but still, with the sometimes you do require some face-to-face meetings, and you do need to travel. But then again, transport links too have improved. But then again, even transport links have improved, so even that is not much of a problem. So he's basically, in the later part, he's just listed down how this change in this trend demonstrates the change in the world, right? Or the technological development that the world has gone through, right? That there are some modern day advantages due to which now the governments, they are able to go for a different strategy, which is that of piecemeal dispersal, right? Okay, so that's your first paragraph. Let's move on to the next one. So starting with the next set of paragraphs, proponents of moving civil servants around promise countless benefits. It disperses the risk that a terrorist attack or natural disaster will cripple an entire government. So now the author has started listing down the benefits which are cited by people who support the idea of moving out the civil servants from the capital cities. Okay, please note that the author has said that these are the benefits which have been cited by the proponents, by the people who support this. The author has not directly given his opinion here. Okay, so so the first benefit that he cites of these proponents is that, well, suppose if you in case all the civil servants, all the bureaucrats, all the government officials are situated in the same place, in the same central building, in the one building in the same capital city, and then there is a terrorist attack or maybe some sort of natural disaster, then the whole in that city, and then the whole government machinery will be wiped out, right? And it will cripple the entire government. However, if you have the civil servants, the bureaucrats, and the government officials like located in different parts of the nation, in that case, the possibility that such a terrorist attack or such a natural disaster might wipe out or might cripple the entire government will be pretty low, right? Because they're all situated in different places, and it's quite unlikely that a disaster might happen in all those places together, right? So that's the first benefit that they cite. Next, they will go on and say that Wonks in the sticks will be inspired by new ideas that walled-off capitals cannot conjure up. So Wonks, guys, is a term that is used in a slightly derogatory way for anyone who's very studious and anyone who's like very hardworking, who's generally not very creative, who does not have this ability to come up with out of the box ideas. So it's a kind of a derogatory term which is used for a studious and hardworking person who's not considered to be creative. So he says that, and in the sticks is an idiom which is used to refer to to refer to someone being in a rural setup or in a the countryside setup, right? Not in the urban area, in the rural areas. So he's saying that having these Wonks the reference to the government officials, to the bureaucrats here, says that these otherwise studious, hardworking, and not so creative people, if they are if they live in the countryside, then they might just be inspired by new ideas and might come up with some new creative ways of doing things, right? Which might be beneficial for everyone, as opposed to what they do when they are just walled off in the capital cities, right? In a urban setup, they might just continue being what they are, hardworking and boring and not creative. While if you just put them in the countryside, they might just come up with some really good ideas. They might just become creative. So that's what they cite as the second benefit, that creativity boost from the countryside. Next, they say that autonomous regulators perform best far from the pressure and lobbying of the big city. Okay, and so a similar point. He says that if they are away from the big city, right, in that case they'll gain more autonomy. They'll have more independence. The government officials, the bureaucrats, and hence this independence might improve the performance, right? So that's another benefit. Next, he finally says some of the proponents even say that putting the government officials away from the capital cities and into the near the countryside and in the near remote areas might even hail a cure for ascendant cynicism and populism. The unloved bureaucrats of faraway capitals will become as popular as firefighters once they mix with regular folk. Okay, now to understand this, we need to bring in the notion that people generally have about government officials, right? So guys, the way we generally think of government officials or bureaucrats is we generally there's generally a negative connotation or a negative kind of attribution that is used for government officials, which basically on the lines of that they are insensitive towards the needs of the common people. They are generally rude. They are not very approachable, right? That's the general notion, or the kind of attributes that we relate with government officials. Okay, that's what the author means when he says ascendant cynicism and populism, right? That's what he means. The kind of generally negative uh, qualities that we attribute to the government officials, putting these government officials in the remote places among the people and not in the capital cities, might in fact help with getting rid of this kind of negative image that the government officials, the bureaucrats have amongst the masses, right? Because now they'll mingle among the people, with the masses, with the people, and the way firefighters are admired and kind of loved by the people, right? In the same way, now the bureaucrats might also get to mingle with the people, and there'll be less negative qualities will be attributed to them, right? So that's what he means to say by cite as the final benefit. Okay. Beyond these sunny visions, that is, beyond these benefits, dispersing central government functions usually has three specific aims. Dispersing central government functions means sending out. So when you're sending out the bureaucrats from the capital cities, you're in a way dispersing the central government functions, and this has usually three specific aims. They are the first one, to improve the lives of both civil servants and those living in clogged capitals. Now, see, as civil servants move out of these congested and these clogged cities, these clogged capitals, it improves the lives of the people living in the clogged capitals, because, well, the capitals will not be so congested and clogged now. And it also improves the lives of the civil servants, as they will be moving to less clogged areas. The author has anyways, guys, detailed each of these three aims in the later part of the paragraph, in the later paragraphs. Okay, and next he says, to save money. The second aim is to save money, and the third is to redress regional imbalances. Okay, the trouble is that these goals are not always realized. Okay, so in these two paragraphs, the author has basically listed the benefits and the aims, which are related to this idea of having the civil servants, having the bureaucrats go out of these capital cities to more remote areas. Okay, so let's move on to the next paragraph. Next para, the first aim, improving living conditions, has a long pedigree. So what he means by that is that the first aim, with respect to the first aim, this idea has been tried many times in the past. It has a long pedigree, it has a long history behind it. Okay, after the Second World War, Britain moved thousands of civil servants to agreeable English country towns as London was rebuilt. But swapping the capital for somewhere smaller is not always agreeable. Attrition rates can exceed 80%. Okay, so he says that, well, this idea, the idea of moving bureaucrats away from the capital cities has had a long history so far as the first aim is concerned, so far as the idea of improving the lives of these bureaucrats and other people in the clog in the capital cities is concerned. This has had a long history, but and in fact even Britain had engaged in this kind of an endeavor after the Second World War. When London was being rebuilt, they shifted the bureaucrats, the government employees, to more remote areas, at least until the capital city of London was getting rebuilt. But the thing is that swapping capital for somewhere smaller is not always an agreeable idea that people believe it to be, and it often leads to really high attrition rates. Attrition rates are basically the rate at which people leave the organization or the government bodies in this case, so agencies in this case. So it often results in uh, mm, uh, you know negative repercussions like this, where people leave the company, people leave the organization. So he basically lists some negatives so far as the first aim is concerned here. Okay, next he talks about the second reason to pack bureaucrats off is to save money. The second reason is to save money. And how? Office space costs far more in capitals. So far as capital cities are concerned, the real estate prices are really high, and hence the office space will cost a lot. So if you have less number of people in the capital cities, obviously you need less space, so you can save some money. Agencies that are moved elsewhere often recruit better workers on lower salaries than in capitals, where well-paying multinational mop up talent. So he's saying that also in terms of the skilled workforce will be available at cheaper rates, at lower salaries in the remote places, as compared to the capital cities, where because there are many multinationals in the capital cities, the prices, the salaries that you have to offer to get the same level of skilled workforce generally go higher, and hence it is also cheaper in terms of uh, getting skilled workforce at lower salaries if you have these bureaucrats go to the more remote places, right? So it saves money. So that's what he talks about. He basically talks about the first two aims in this paragraph. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Coming to the next paragraph, the third reason to shift is to rebalance regional inequality. Is talking about the third aim here. Norway treats federal jobs as a resource every region deserves to enjoy, like profits from oil. Where government jobs go, private ones follow. So what he means to say here is that, like, he's given the example of Norway, and he basically trying to make the point that even if in a remote region, if federal jobs are moved to a remote region, private jobs automatically follow that, and hence this phenomena results in the upliftment and development of that remote region as a result. Okay, that's what he's trying to say here. So, and he has given the example of Norway, that Norway almost treats federal jobs like a resource that needs to be shared among every region. It should not be just limited to the capital cities or to the other cities. It should be shared everywhere, like wherever there is the requirement of development and upliftment of the area. So it should be shared there, right? So that's the first point he's made. Next, he says, sometimes the aim is to fulfill the potential of a country's second tier cities. Okay. Now he's made a different point here, guys. Both of these points are related to the third aim, but within the third aim, he has bifurcated into two categories. The first category is moving the jobs into the most remote areas, and the second category is when you don't move the bureaucrats or the jobs to the most remote areas, but rather to the tier 2 cities. So instead of from the tier 1 cities or the capital cities, you just move them to tier 2 cities instead of taking them all the way away to the remote cities, as in the first case. Okay, so he says that sometimes the aim is to fulfill the potential of a country's second tier cities. Unlike poor remote places, so unlike these places, the tier 2 cities, bigger cities, can make the most of relocated government agencies, linking them to local universities and businesses and supplying a better educated workforce. So these are the advantages that the tier 2 cities have over remote cities when it comes to moving bureaucracies or these jobs uh, to areas out of capital cities. So even out of capital cities, there are two options. The first is remote areas, the second is tier 2 cities. So tier 2 cities offer these advantages over remote cities, as the author has mentioned here. And yeah, supplying a better educated workforce. The decision, and then he cites an example for the same. He says that the decision in 1946 to set up uh, America's America's Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta rather than Washington, D.C., has transformed the city into a hub for health sector research and business. Right. So he has given an example that how creating an agency, a government agency, in a tier 2 city has really transformed that city into a hub for health sector research and business, right? And they had been able to get all the advantages of that tier 2 city there. So he's given the example of this here. So now let's move on to the next paragraph. Okay, coming to the last paragraph. Now, before I explain this, guys, I've moved the earlier graphics out of the picture. I've only let the graphic of the very last paragraph remain here just for reference. And the reason I've done that is because for some technical reasons, the graphics could not be displayed at the position where my screen is at this point. Okay, while I explained it here. So the graphics for this paragraph will basically finally they'll appear here. Okay, so just pay attention and follow along. So the author says the dilemma is obvious. What dilemma? The dilemma of deciding where to move the government agencies to, right? When you decided to move the government agencies and the bureaucrats out of the capital cities, like where do you get them? Where do you put them? Do you put them in the most remote areas, the most underdeveloped areas, or do you put them in tier 2 cities? That's the dilemma. So the dilemma is obvious. Pick small poor towns and areas of high unemployment, get new jobs, but it is hard to attract the most qualified workers. So if you pick the remote areas, the most remote areas, then these areas which are also areas of high unemployment, they'll get new jobs and they will develop and they'll be uplifted. So that those are the advantages of picking these areas. But then you won't get there'll be a lack of qualified workforce there. That is the disadvantage there. Okay. And if you opt for larger cities with infrastructure and better qualified residents, and then the country's most deprived areas see little benefits. And if you opt for the tier 2 cities, which provide the advantage of better infrastructure and workforce and qualified workforce, then what happens is, well, in that case, the disadvantage is that your remote regions we won't see much benefit there. So that's why it's a dilemma, like which location to choose when you're deciding on uh, moving your government agencies out of the capital. Okay, so all right, let's come to the next part. Others contend that decentralization, okay, begets corruption by making government agencies less accountable. Now, so far the author had been talking about the benefits which have been cited by the proponents of this idea, and then what are the three aims, etc., etc. So most of the discussion had been about like the benefits and for what reasons are these bureaucracies and these government agencies can be moved out of your capital cities. He's also cited some concerns with those ideas, but more or less the discussion has been in terms of moving them. Now, in the last paragraph, he also cites he looks at the other side of the picture, right? He looks at the disadvantages, the direct disadvantages of moving these government agencies or these bureaucracies or the bureaucrats out of the capital cities. He says that many people they contend that this decentralization begets corruption. It will result in corruption. This decentralization will result in corruption because of a decrease in accountability, right? By making the government agencies less accountable. And then he cites a study. He says that a study in America found that state government corruption is worse when the state capital is isolated. And journalists who tend to live in bigger cities, who generally tend to live in bigger cities, they become less watchful of those in power because, well, the people who are now in power, they have moved to the more remote areas, right? They move to more remote areas, or they move to the tier 2 cities. And now these journalists who who haven't followed them along, who still live in the main capital cities, they won't be so focused on these bureaucrats who are not living in the capital cities anymore. And then now, because they are not so focused on these bureaucrats, there'll be less accountability on part of the government agencies and these bureaucrats who are now in the remote regions, right? And because of the decrease in accountability, that will lead to more corruption, right? So the author has also cited an American study with respect to the same. So all in all, in the last two paragraphs, what the author has done is, first of all, he talks about the dilemma relating to deciding on the final location of these government agencies. Should they be remote areas or should they be tier 2 cities? And then he has finally talked about the broader concerns of how this decentralization, according to some people, can lead to corruption. Okay, so that's your last two paragraphs. Okay, guys, now before moving on to the central idea, let's take a very brief overview. Let's go through the schematic of this passage. The author started the discussion with introducing the idea of decentralization and how it is a current trend for around the world for capital cities to disgorge bureaucrats and to disgorge bureaucracies, to send out government agencies to the more remote areas of the nation, right? He talks about that and how that has been basically made possible by by the technological change that the world has gone through in terms of communications, in terms of travel links, etc. Right. So that's the first part. Next, in the next paragraph here, he lists the speculated benefits by the people who support this idea of decentralization. That what can be the various benefits. There are four of them that he has cited. After that, he talks about what are the aims with which governments, if they go for this idea, they go ahead, right? What are the aims? There are three aims as such. First, related to the improving the lives of these bureaucrats and people living in those clogged cities. Second, to save money and to reduce expenditure, and the third is to redress regional imbalances and inequality. Right. So he lists in this part. He basically lists and comments on the three aims and functions of these of this idea of moving the bureaucrats and bureaucracies and government agencies out of the capital cities. Finally, in the last part, he just talks about the broad concerns of related that might be related to this idea, and he basically talked about just one concern, that this might result in a lack of accountability on part of the bureaucrats and government agencies, and hence might lead to corruption. Guys, please note that the author has not cited this as his own opinion. He has said that others who contend that there are other people who contend that this might not be a good idea as it might lead to corruption. Okay, so yeah, so that's your flow of the passage.
Okay, so with that, we come to the end of the video, guys. Now, for those of you who have not attempted the questions, you can attempt the questions by going to the link in the description of the video. It will, when you click on the link, it will take you to an interface where you can attempt the questions. And once you've attempted the questions, and you can move on to the second part of the video, where I discuss the questions of the passage in detail. Okay. Again, those who have not seen the intro video or want to check out the complete playlist of all of these cat passages, you can click here on this side. This will lead you to the playlist, to the complete playlist, which has all the videos, and the description of those videos also has the links to attempt those passages. So you can do that. Also, yeah, subscribe to the channel. So that will definitely help. All right. Thank you guys. See you in the next one.